Okay, our camera still isn't coming through, but so I'm sorry you cannot see us, but we can at least see everybody in the meeting now. So sorry about that, and I'm going to keep working on it as we kind of go to see if I can bring that up, but I don't want to waste any more time. So let's just go ahead and move on to the approval of the April meeting minutes.
Are there any changes suggested for the minutes? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Ron Onslow, I would move to approve the minutes as posted.
I think somebody seconded it, but I don't think we could hear that.
Jim Hodges seconded.
Great. So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, minutes pass. And we'll go ahead and move into agenda item number 3, which is a CAPER preview. I had to look that up. It stands for Consolidated Annual Performance Evaluation Report. So I look forward to hearing what staff has to say.
Thank you, Councilor Young. Yeah, that is correct. The CAPER is our Consolidated Annual Performance Evaluation Report, and this is what Clark County staff submit to HUD at the end of every program year to report on basically the performance of the CDBG and home programs over the course of the year. So this draws from the action plan that would have been submitted for like the 2022 program year. So we will be reporting on how much we spent in CDBG, home, CDBG CV, and home ARP. The program year runs July 1, 2022 to June 30th, 2023. So that's the period of time that we're looking at for the spending. The CAPER also includes information about like the number of households that were served by each of the programs and the number of beneficiaries that were basically produced by projects that were completed during that time. So I'm thinking of like our infrastructure projects that have kind of a different way of measuring beneficiaries than the like household served programs would have. So that is coming out very soon here. It's going to be presented to the County Council on September 26th at 10 a.m. There's going to be a presentation to the council, and there's a public hearing attached to that as well. So anyone that wants to kind of provide feedback to the county on our CDBG and home programs, that's an opportunity to do that at that council meeting. Prior to that, the CAPER is going to be released on September 14th. That's this Thursday for public comment. So that'll be out on the Clark County website, and I'll also be sending it out to our very large listserv of people that get all of our emails about CDBG and home stuff. So all of our contractors will receive that to take a look at the draft, what we did over the last year, and feel free to send us any comments that you might have on that. Again, the public hearing is September 26th, but the comment period runs for another couple days through September 28th. And although the County Council sees the full CAPER first, at the next meeting of this board, we will do an overview of that CAPER. It'll be a similar presentation that the council gets with kind of incorporating any changes that had to be made after the council meeting. So you'll get the full rundown of that report once it's approved by HUD, whenever it is that we meet next. So does anybody have questions about that for now?
Could you real quick just kind of explain the primary purpose, where it goes, what it does?
Yeah, so the purpose is basically, so we do these consolidated plans every 5 years, which I'm going to talk a little bit about in our next section. We're talking about the RFA. And then from there, we do an annual action plan every year that we submit to HUD, and they have to approve, basically telling HUD what we're going to do over the next year and how we're going to spend our HUD funding. So then the CAPER is kind of the flip side of that, where after the year has passed, we tell HUD, these are the projects that we completed, these are the accomplishments that our contractor has had, this is how much we spent, basically just saying, like, this is what we told you we were going to do, and this is what we actually did. So it's really just an accountability mechanism for the CDBG and home programs. Some of its purpose is to tell the council what we did. Really, the primary purpose is to tell HUD what we did, and to keep all of the kind of data coming in every year for them. And then each CAPER builds on the last one a little bit within the consolidated plan. So you'll start to see, like, some number of households served or number of beneficiaries kind of increasing over the course of the consolidated plan period. So then when you get to closer to the end, you start seeing, like, okay, this is where we need to focus a little bit more, or like this is an area that we've done really well in over the course of the consolidated planning period. It's also something that we can kind of reflect on as we go into looking at the next action plan and also the next consolidated plan, which we'll be doing pretty soon.
Excuse me, it's Ron Onslow. And so is this a report on just, you said it's a 5-year report, but is it just on what's been accomplished from 22, 23?
It's actually only a 1-year report, so yeah, I didn't make that very clear. So the consolidated plan is 5 years, but that's separate from this. So this performance report is something that we do every year, and it ties back to the consolidated plan. So it's kind of an accountability mechanism for the consolidated plan, but we do it every year.
Thank you.
Emily, this is Michael. Do you mind if I jump in for a moment as well?
Yeah, go for it.
Sure, and thank you. And thank you for the question, Councilor Young. Another way, it isn't just for HUD, like we really do, it's also important in my mind as a tool for the county council. And another way to think of it is we set in the 5-year consolidated plan what we intend to do with the home and CDBG funds for the next 5 years. Out of that consolidated plan, we put together the request for applications that gets issued every year, which is the next thing that Emily is going to start talking about. But what we are soliciting is based on what we put in to that consolidated plan. Then based on that RFA and that solicitation, we receive the proposals every year. The Urban County Policy Board reviews the proposals, scores the proposals, recommends the proposals to be funded to the county council for approval. And that is what becomes the action plan for that upcoming program year, what is being funded in support of the consolidated plan. So then at a couple months later, at the end or after the end of the program year, we report to the council and to HUD, and I like to, obviously also to the Urban County Policy Board, what the actions, what the outcomes and the results, what the funding went to for the previous program year, which would have been the action plan that the council approved the year prior. So that's kind of the cycle that happens every year in terms of how we solicit, what gets funded, what goes into the action plan for the next year, and then the CAPER is looking back at the previous year that we're reporting to all the parties involved, the UCPB, the council, and HUD, what took place. And Emily, do you want to talk about when the next, or just mention when the next annual the next consolidated plan will be?
I am going to talk about that when I talk about the RFA.
Okay.
Okay, anything else on the CAPER?
You can go ahead and just take the floor here. All this is you, so go ahead, go right on ahead.
Okay, so the RFA I put on this agenda because we had a discussion back in April and March after we did the scoring for the applications. And some of the board members mentioned just kind of suggestions for how the scoring process could go better, how you felt like the scoring could better reflect the actual goals of the program, and some things specifically about, I noted equity, past performance, and community needs as some of the big ones. So I've basically just kind of gone through our RFA and looked at kind of the comments I got from you all and came up with some suggestions for how we can better incorporate some of those things into the RFA. But I figured before I kind of get into those changes, I just want to give a brief overview of kind of how we run the cyclical process with the RFA and the applications, and how that ties back to our planning. So I'm going to start there. So basically, we have a consolidated plan which runs for 5 years at a time. The current 5-year consolidated plan runs from 2020 through 2024. So within the consolidated plans, we do an annual action plan. And the annual action plans tie very closely to the consolidated plan. So basically we say within those, like the goals that we established within the consolidated plan, and basically the priorities, what we want to do, what's important to the county, all kind of ties back to the consolidated plan. So then the annual RFA is designed to solicit projects and programs that work towards the goals in the consolidated plan. So the RFA, I think I'm going to talk about a little bit more there. But basically, so the one that we're in right now runs 2020 to 2024. So this will be the last funding round that we do of this consolidated plan. And then we'll start working on the next consolidated plan for 2025. So that'll be kind of the RFA associated with that will be coming out about the same time next year, kind of incorporating different goals. And then the consolidated plan along with the 2025 annual action plan are submitted together in the spring of 2025. So those things kind of happen in concert with each other. The first annual action plan and the consolidated plan really will happen kind of together, but it'll be a much more involved process than our usual annual action plans, where we're doing more community outreach, more kind of research into the state of the county and the state of our like housing and community development programs, and developing new goals for the county. And that's a process that you'll all be more involved in than just doing kind of the annual funding rounds. So the main thing I wanted to mention with that new one coming up is that because the consolidated, because the RFA ties closely to the consolidated plan, as we're developing the new consolidated plan over the next year, the next RFA after this one, it might be significantly different than what we have now. It might be similar because the goals might not change a lot, but it could be very different if we kind of want to re-weight what we think the goals and priorities of the county are. So right now, our goals in the 2020 to 2024 consolidated plan are public facilities and neighborhood improvements, affordable housing and homelessness, and asset and economic development. So we have separate applications and application guidance, which are released for each of those 3 goal areas. So it's one RFA, but it almost looks like 3 RFAs. They're all very similar, but the applications are a little different, and so the guidance that we release for each type of application is a little different. So each of the questions are kind of similar so that we can compare them, but they're not they're not the same because they kind of need to address projects in a different way. So just briefly, I want to talk about the RFA timeline. So we are going to release the RFA this year on October 2nd, so it's coming right up. The Neighborly Application Portal will open that same day. We're going to do pre-application meetings the second week of October. I'll announce the specific dates and time for those. It's a great thing for people to go to if you want to kind of like learn more about what we're looking for in the specific applications. Really good for contractors that haven't applied for funding with Clark County before. And then pre-applications are due October 31st. And the purpose of those is for staff to do a kind of surface level overview of what your project is proposing to make sure, like, geographically it's in an acceptable area, like it's in a low moderate income area, it's serving residents of Clark County, or it's an acceptable type of project based on what is allowed under the CDBG and home programs, that we think it's going to be able to meet the requirements, and that it's the type of project that the county is looking for. So you have to submit that by October 31st, but you can submit it earlier. So we're going to do kind of rolling application review. So we don't necessarily, like, if you don't want to wait till October 31st to know if your application is allowable, basically, you can submit it earlier. We'll look at it earlier, and then you can get started on the full application as soon as your pre-app is approved. So you could have potentially more time to work on the full application because the full thing won't open until you have an approved pre-app. And then final applications are due on December 1st.
Quick question on that. Who is eligible to apply?
Technically anyone can apply. But you have to basically be able to demonstrate through the process and through our review that the organization is going to be able to accept and responsibly manage federal funds. And so that can be kind of a higher bar for contractors to meet. We have like audit requirements, so we're going to have to look at audits for the organizations. And of course, you have to have a program that makes sense, basically, for CDBG and home funding. So we do every year get, you know, at least one, sometimes a handful of applications that, you know, maybe the organization just doesn't quite do something that fits into our program, or maybe it's like the organization's fine, but the project they're proposing, for whatever reason, is isn't going to work, is not in an area that works, or they're not proposing to serve like Clark County outside of Vancouver, something like that. So really, as long as you're meeting the requirements of like using the funding appropriately, you can handle federal funding, you're going to serve low-income people in Clark County outside of the city of Vancouver, then you can apply.
I local government agencies and nonprofits, individuals cannot apply, and for-profit organizations are generally not eligible for CDBG and home funds. And as Emily already indicated, the target population is low income as per federal.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you for clarifying that.
Can I also add in one reminder for the local jurisdictions? The census tract block groups have been updated, and if you are looking to apply and your eligible project does not fall within an eligible census tract, this would be for our public facilities and neighborhood improvement projects. We need to get a local income survey completed right away. Please contact me if that is something that you'll need to do before your application. And
one more question real quick. the way, so our current consolidated plan, I assume that has goals, directives, and limitations on what the funds can be used. Are our limitations currently the same as the HUD limitations, or are we constricting beyond what HUD allows or doesn't allow?
We have some of our own program policies within Clark County. They're not extremely kind of burdensome or strict beyond what HUD requires. But of course, like you mentioned, kind of making sure the applications fit within our goal areas. That's something that HUD asks us to do, is to have the goal areas and to have applications within them. But whatever those goal areas are up to the county. So, we're looking at kind of these 3 specific types of applications, which is what we want to see, and we'll want to make sure that whatever people apply for makes sense within those goal areas. So that's county specific.
Okay, and then to kind of further on that, what kind of a discussion and what kind of outreach is done to when we're building those goals?
So I'm going to find out a little bit along with you all, because I haven't done a consolidated plan yet myself, but there is a pretty extensive outreach component to the consolidated plan. The action plan does a little bit of outreach, like with having public meetings, and we send it out to get feedback from people, but it's not as much of a give and take kind of an outreach process. So there's definitely going to be considerably more consultation with this board, with the community organizations that we work with other agencies that we intersect with, like maybe community planning or broadband providers, the City of Vancouver, anyone else who kind of does work that could potentially kind of partner with Clark County, or people that have kind of similar, just do similar work to community services that kind of makes sense to think through, like how we can work better with them, how we can support organizations in what they're already trying to do in the county. And so that process, I know we've done surveys in the past. We'll also do some meetings, like we'll talk to you all here. We'll, have feedback from people. But in terms of how that process is going to look specifically is something that I still have to figure out. So if you have kind of suggestions for folks that you think we should be kind of reaching out to as that's developed, that's great.
Can we kind of keep that, maybe we can keep in communication on that and just kind of keep us up to date with what those efforts look like before it rolls out? Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely want the board to be able to be pretty involved in kind of the development of those goals, and so you all have good ownership over the next consolidated plan, and we can make sure that what we're doing going forward will, it really does significantly drive the work that we do over the next 5 years. So we definitely want to make sure that this board is has a big role in kind of driving the process of developing the plan. Michael and Rebecca, do you want to add anything to that? You've actually been through this process before.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And a lot of the Urban County Policy Board members have as well. We do have some veterans here, but there is we are required by federal regulation and take it very seriously. There's a whole citizen participation plan, not only in getting the action plans and getting the capers and stuff approved, but in putting together the consolidated plan. And as Emily has mentioned, there will be surveys going out to community stakeholders, including service providers, housing providers, target populations, policymakers. I would expect some community meetings, community forums, public hearings, and absolutely involvement from the Urban County Policy Board, both in providing significant input into what the objectives and priorities and goals of the consolidated plan should be, but also in shaping what that community engagement process is and participating in it as well.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, if there are not any more kind of general questions about the RFA, the consolidated plan, I'm going to get into specifics. Okay, so what I wrote down in talking to you all back in March and April, the main things I was hearing as feedback on the scoring was the things that I put on this list here. And I wanted to, I think at the time we had discussed how the scoring, we can't really just change the way that we score because the scoring is built into the RFA. So this is the discussion that we're having about kind of making adjustments to the RFA so that when we get to the scoring process, we're weighting the things that you actually care about more and that you're getting more information from applicants kind of upfront. So the things that I heard that we wanted to talk about more or put a little bit more weight on were kind of increasing the consideration of equity and the weight in scoring for equity, weighting more heavily specific community needs. I interpreted that as more like niche community needs versus like Clark County overall, but like, you know, what are like the battleground specific needs, or what are the needs of the specific neighborhood or the specific program population that is served. And finding a way to kind of incorporate past performance into the scoring for contractors that we have worked with before without, you know, penalizing contractors that we haven't worked with before. And then just generally making sure that language in the application questions are like really clearly and completely matching with the language in the scoring. So that last part is something we don't need to talk about too much today, but it is something that I'm going through to make sure that as we ask a question, that the answers we're getting are going to match really closely with kind of the score that we want to get out of it. So making some of those questions a little bit more clear so that the answers we get are easier to score because they actually will answer the question as giving us the information that we need in order to score it. So the first thing that I was looking into with our RFAs is the equity portion. So all of the applications ask this question about equity. As I go through this whole thing, I'm not going to read all of the text and all of my slides, but this is only one, so I'm going to go through this closely. So we say, describe how this proposal will ensure equitable outcomes for underserved populations in Clark County, including LGBTQ+ and BIPOC communities. Identify how proposed services will appropriately address the specific needs of historically underserved populations. And you can demonstrate specific organizational statements or policies that express commitment to operating culturally aware programs. And then we have a 10 points possible with basically a high, mid, and low range scoring based on the information that's provided there. So I think there's kind of two things that we can do to make the equity portion of our RFA stronger. One of which is to ask the organizations to give us more concrete information about what they are doing to increase underserved population, or not to increase, but to collaborate with underserved populations, to serve underserved populations, how they're like actually incorporating equity into their daily operations, et cetera. And then how they plan to do that, like not just in the past and in general, but how this specific project that they're proposing to the county is going to take an equity lens and really work towards that, not just in kind of a general sense there.
Can I make a quick comment?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Thank you. I think it's equally important that we, not only do we ask for applications and how that is, you know, how their project is equitable, but also that we ensure that we're equitable. And one of the things that's that, we've kind of been having this discussion all along, but some of these organizations, many of them that, in my opinion, fit the equity bill perfectly, may not have the capability to run through this process. So my question is, what can we do as a county to make sure that we have either staff available or some way of supporting some of these groups and kind of holding their hand through this process so that they don't get excluded?
I think that's a great point. It's something that as staff we've kind of been thinking about, and it's something that does feel like a sticking point to me with this process, because we really want to serve, we want to be able to fund organizations that are close to the communities that they serve, and the process does put up significant barriers to who is able to get federal funding. So some of that we really can't get around in terms of just meeting the finance, audit, staff capacity, things that HUD requires. But I do think that that's something I want to look at more as we're doing the next consolidated plan, to talk through what can we do to do more targeted outreach, I think, to get organizations that we haven't worked with before to apply, and then kind of be able to devote more time and attention to doing technical assistance through the application process. So right now we do the pre-application meetings, and theoretically we should be able to provide some good technical assistance in those meetings, and help people with the applications that way. Typically, we don't get much attendance from people who aren't our kind of usual organizations that we get applications from. So I appreciate you bringing that up, because that is something that I wanted to kind of dig into more as we're doing the next consolidated plan, because it's something I want to be able to do, but definitely has kind of hurdles when it comes to the administrative capacity part. I don't know if there's a lot we can do on this RFA besides, I do want to make clear to everyone that the pre-application meetings are a place where you can get additional assistance with doing these, and make sure that we have pretty good reach on the who actually receives the RFA. Michael, do you want to add something?
Sure, I can add a couple things. And Councilor Young, I think you are spot on in this being a significant issue. And we do not have good solutions yet for home and CDBG funds, specifically within the Department of Community Services. We in the management team, we actually have an ongoing discussion right now about what can we fund, how can we fund, how can we build capacity of grassroots community-based organizations and buy-in for organizations that are composed of and to serve culturally specific groups in our community. Barriers that we are trying to navigate that are specific to home and CDBG that I think, there are strong barriers to this type of organization. One is that HUD will require anyone that contracts with home and CDBG to be a sub-grantee as opposed to a contractor, which means that they are responsible for compliance, just like we're responsible for monitoring the compliance, but they're responsible for compliance with all the federal regulations that come with these funds. That includes things like if they receive enough funds, having to do a very expensive and intrusive and costly single audit each year that they meet a funding threshold. Which is a barrier for some organizations. Having to be having to operate cost reimbursement contracts. So they have to have the fiscal capacity to outlay a significant amount of funds with, before being reimbursed for those. Our ability to change the aspects of being a subrecipient and not using a cost reimbursement model with these funds is extremely limited. I do know the city of Vancouver is looking in they're doing their consolidated plan this year, and they're looking at using some of the CDBG funds for a small community-based organization capacity development. Sam Whitley and I have been in conversations of what are they proposing to do? How are they looking at doing it? How would they do it? I don't think it's been completely figured out yet, but we're really interested to see if we could implement something like that. And where we may have more opportunity to help these community-based organizations in the near term might be with our local funds and our state funds. And we're in conversations internally about how to do that. But the challenge of helping small organizations build the capacity to manage public contracts and manage public funds, especially when they are not local funds, it's a hard challenge that the whole state is in the midst of discussing right now. And I'll stop because I know we have a time. This meeting is time limited, but I will share that in our most recent request for applications, not related to the Urban County Policy Board or Home or CDBG, but with EPRAP, the Eviction Prevention Rental Assistance Program. Those funding recommendations are about to go to the council now. The state requirement was 10% of the funds go to by and for organizations, like those organizations that are from communities, historically underrepresented communities and serve those communities. And in the EPRAP funding recommendations, about 30% of the funds from Clark County, that Clark County is distributing, is going to go to those by and for organizations and targeting those communities. So we're definitely working on it, but we've not cracked that code yet completely on how to do it.
Great, thank you for that. I really appreciate it. And I know there's a pile of things that you got to do, but that I think is one that's really important to work on. I think if I remember correctly from one of our meetings in the past, I think it may have been mentioned like 50,000 or something is like a number that we don't really want to go below because of the work with that. But I mean, $5,000 or $10,000 to a vulnerable community can make a huge difference. So, if there's a way that we can figure out for some of these smaller organizations, some of these smaller projects and areas that really need it, I would really appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. We can talk about that more too. Okay, picking up where I left off. So, excuse me. So first, one thing I was thinking of was to kind of just have more detail on those questions and ask for more information from the agencies. And the second option is to do that and then also increase the points possible here. So I'm going to go through, the next two slides are information that was shared from us from the RFA that Washington County, Oregon puts out. And I thought that they had kind of a very good in-depth way of, here, I'll just put it up, of asking about equity. So they kind of have two things here. This is the first on this slide, and then there's going to be a second one after that. That just asks like more in detail. And I think the thing that differentiates this from the way that we ask about equity is really digging more into the specific project or the specific program that an applicant is bringing forward. So not just asking, like, how does your organization address equity? How have you incorporated equity in the past? But really asking our applicants to look at the specific project that they're asking us to fund and tell us how this project is going to advance equity in your community. It also asks about, like, barriers that you think the communities might face in accessing the services you're providing, and how you're going to address that. So this question is housing focused, because that's just how Washington County had it. But if the board kind of likes this more pointed approach to asking about equity project specific way, I think I will take this and kind of, you know, probably use it pretty closely, but of course, just kind of strengthen it out to be, I guess, broader to kind of the programs that we're working with and not just housing. Is that something that you think you'd all like to see, to kind of ask our applicants to talk about how their specific project is going to deal with kind of equity concerns and opportunities, and what they're specifically doing in terms of this project to deal with racial equity?
I kind of feel like, I don't know that I want to limit it.
Okay.
Because there are many issues of equity that we deal with. So I don't know that I would want to necessarily focus on one particular group. I would like to just, I mean, maybe we can point out multiple different, you know, more vulnerable communities that there are, and race certainly is one of them.
Yeah, that's absolutely something I can kind of incorporate here. I know the way we have it now, we mention ours is a little broader with underserved populations, including LGBTQ+ and BIPOC communities. So that's something I can include as well, or, you know, keep. And then I can make it a little broader too, if there's other kind of, you know, some applicants probably have a better idea than I do, or as staff does in general, about kind of some equity concerns that they're seeing and that they're able to address. So I think that's good feedback, and I can definitely ask that.
Okay, I'm like the only person talking here, so more people need to chime in on this.
I can talk about the next part of this too. So part two is, this is really, as I was reading through this, I think this is really would be specific for construction projects. So I could see something like this fitting well for our infrastructure projects and for housing development projects both. So basically asking applicants to provide more detail about how they're going to basically create opportunities through the project itself, not just in the kind of the end result of the project, but through the construction for minority women, disabled business enterprises, small business enterprises, how you're going to, you know, contract with organizations that are owned by low-income people or that hire a lot of low-income people, how you're going to participate in kind of workforce training. So a lot of this is covered under Section 3 but that applies to projects that are over $200,000. So not that many of our projects end up having to meet those requirements, but a good number of them do. And so, you know, that is kind of another opportunity here to, even where Section 3 isn't required, to still ask applicants to talk about how they're going to try to work towards, you know, it's not required, but how are you going to work towards the goals of kind of incorporating some, whether it's like more apprenticeships or making an effort to hire low-income people to work on the project, contracting with women or minority-owned businesses, et cetera. So I think this is kind of a second option that Washington County also does that I thought was a great idea for getting more, again, just kind of strengthening and making our equity questions and equity answers, just asking kind of more of applicants to say what they're actually going to do versus just kind of the general sense of we care about equity and we'll be prioritizing it. So I'm happy to take any feedback on either of those two things. I think I will, so far I'm hearing that kind of this first is going to be something that we would like to see some of, just making it more specific and asking more specifically for details about your specific programs. The second part is kind of new, so I definitely want some feedback here if this is something we want to ask to include with our construction projects or not. Anybody online?
Okay, I guess I'll speak. I personally, and I don't know how you would dictate that, but I want to see projects that are driven by equity. So, I mean, the reason the project exists to begin with is equity, not just a project and let's kind of figure out how does this fit equity, if that makes sense. But I don't know how you put that down on paper.
Yeah, that's something I can think through a little bit more. I do think,
So
go ahead.
I was going to say, this is Katie. Maybe it's questions about how the applicant is involving the intended population in either development of the plan or ongoing engagement with that population after construction.
Thanks for that feedback, Katie. I like that. Okay, I think I have some good stuff to work with here. So, as you all kind of come away from this, if you have more thoughts about it, feel free to pass them along to me. I'll probably work pretty heavily from what we have here, and then incorporate kind of what I heard from you all today, but then I'm happy to get more feedback kind of in the next few weeks as I'm kind of reworking these. So then I guess the other part of this that I had thought about was, do we want to increase the points for equity here? I think it's probably going to mean taking some points away from some other parts of the application just to kind of keep the score out of 100. Is this something that we do want to add more weight to? Mostly want to hear from board members on this one.
I think that's hard to say until we have the whole list of questions and points in front of us.
Okay, that makes sense.
Jim Hodges here. I just had a couple of questions. So our
Yeah.
primary criteria for eligibility is income-based right now. And I'm thinking of smaller communities. Of course, Camas, outside of Vancouver, or about the same size as Battleground, and one of the bigger agencies, obviously, that applies for this money is as far as a municipality. But it's difficult for places like Yakult and Ridgefield, perhaps, and some of the other smaller communities to develop these plans for the sole purpose of trying to qualify or get more points for CDBG funds. If they don't necessarily have the resources, they're struggling in many cases already. And I understand the goal of the proposal. It just seems overly burdensome, I guess, because it's undefined. And I understand you're working to try to get that figured out. I just wanted to point that out as, these are hard things to do, and it's hard to quantify how you might serve an underserved population, I guess, with the project, especially like if you're doing a neighborhood improvement project or something similar, or a public facility or a park or et cetera. That's basically the primary goal, is to serve people with low mod incomes.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, I'm definitely sympathetic to kind of the added burden that comes when we're sort of asking for, anytime we're asking for more from organizations that are already kind of strapped for time and resources on doing these. So kind of as you were talking, was thinking maybe we don't kind of ask for something called an equity plan, but we just kind of incorporate some of what this is asking into into kind of one main equity question. So we're talking about how your project is advancing equity in terms of like once the project is done or the project is underway, but then for construction projects, it's not an entirely different question, and it doesn't ask you for a whole plan, but kind of gives an opportunity for folks who are doing construction to talk about how they're, hopefully but how they might attempt to kind of provide some additional like contracting opportunities, even if it's just something like advertising the opportunity to more like minority or women-owned businesses, or making an effort to do like additional like workforce training or hiring low-income folks. Does that seem more kind of doable to kind of include it just as something you can talk about, but we're not specifically asking for like a complete plan?
Yeah, speaking for Camas, of course, we advertised almost all of our projects in at least one minority publication. I'm talking about capital improvement projects, of course, but anyway, that's kind of an SOP for us. So yeah, I understand what you're saying. So I appreciate the consideration, I guess, and thought, as it's just aimed at, smaller communities, I guess. And anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I appreciate that feedback, Jim. I'll definitely take that into consideration as I'm thinking through this more. Okay, I think I'm going to move on to talking about past performance then. So this one differs kind of how we ask about it for each different type of application. And we don't specifically ask about past performance anywhere in the applications. So I think part of that reason is because we don't want to ask, like, please describe your past performance, and you get 0 out of 10 just because you haven't worked with the county before. So kind of my thinking here is to, like, as we're considering kind of the experience of agencies in working with federal funding and similar projects, to also have kind of add to this, like, if you have worked on a similar project, like, please describe your project outcomes, please, like, compare, maybe it's the expected project outcomes versus actual project outcomes, number of people served versus how many people you told us you were going to serve, something like that that kind of gets to, versus saying like we have experience, to actually add a little bit more detail about, okay, what was that experience? Can you tell us about the outcomes of that experience? So that's how we talk about it in public facilities. It's pretty similar, although for affordable housing and homelessness, we go on to talk about more like the management is where it's included. So the scoring does attempt to take into consideration positive outcome with similar projects is higher scoring, but the question doesn't really ask the applicant to describe their outcomes. So I think there's kind of a good opportunity with both of these to ask the applicants to not only talk about like, we have done something similar, but talk about like, if we've done something similar, this is how we did it successfully, or this is how we did it well, and give us maybe some data on, especially if you've worked with the county before, to put that out there and make that something that you all can kind of reflect on as you're scoring and have more information. And then this one, I think maybe with asset and economic development, we don't actually need to add much here. I feel like it kind of, there's a lot, I mean, this is 50 points total that I felt like was kind of getting at experience. Describe past experience and outcomes achieved when operating a similar project, experience with similar program models. So I think there's maybe an opportunity here to also say like, and outcomes, and maybe with the solution, like if you've done this before, also talk about like, was this really successful when you did it before? Or like, what kind of evidence do you have to say that what you're proposing here is kind of the best solution given how you've done it before and the outcomes that you've seen before. So that does kind of give the weight, get sort of balanced between like experience and outcomes. So if you have lots of experience, but your outcomes weren't great, then maybe that's more of a mid-range score versus like if you have low experience, but you've been kind of, your program has done a lot of good in other ways, maybe that's also kind of a mid-range score so that folks aren't necessarily penalized for, I mean, you know, there is going to be a little bit of a penalty for not having a lot of experience with the programs, but so that's kind of my thinking here is just to merge into these questions to kind of add a place and a request that the applicants are talking about, not just that they have experience, but providing more concrete information about like what they did and what the outcomes were. So that's something you all can look at and consider in your scoring. Do you feel like that kind of accomplishes what you were hoping to get at by asking for more past performance information?
Maybe I would add into that, like, you know, if they have lack of experience, adding additional information on, you know, how they intend to make it work as well. So kind of some of this, I don't know if it's this specific question, but some of it is, you know, their ability to process through the paperwork and stuff like that. And so if they've done it in the past, that is helpful for us to know because we know they can do it again. But if they haven't in the past, you know, I would like to see something that they're well aware, that, you know, that shows that they're well aware of the requirements and that they're going to, you know, something that indicates that they're going to be a high chance of success with completion of those things. So maybe just some more broad questions about, you know, when they lack experience, you know, what, you know, be very descriptive with what your plans are and how you'll complete it and how you'll get it done right and how you'll be able to accomplish all of the needed requirements.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So in addition to kind of asking about experience, we're adding in where you lack experience or if you have less experience, I guess how the agencies can sort of overcome that, or like describe how, you know, they can still have the capacity or be prepared to kind of work with this program and work with our requirements. And maybe that's just talking about sort of things that they've done in the past that are kind of similar, or other programs that they've worked with that aren't just like this, but.
And I personally would even ask them, you know, not give them the requirements and ask them how they're going to complete it, actually ask them for what the requirements are, because I think there's a lot to be said when people have really studied through and look and know what they're up against. And I think a question to kind of divulge that knowledge, how much they've studied, how much they've looked into this, I think would be a good indicator.
Okay, that sounds good. I can definitely do that. Sorry, I'm having some technology issues. I think I figured out what was going wrong before, is that a bunch of the outlets aren't working in this room, which is why I couldn't get the camera to work. So there's just 1 second here. Okay, any other thoughts about kind of performance and how we can ask about that and talk about that?
This is Ron Onslow. I hear this, and there's a lot of really good ideas. One of the things that comes across to my mind is the small cities are already stretched in staff, and you don't want to make it so bad that it eliminates them applying for or taking on a job, because if the paperwork's going to be more than the job, then they will not do it. So we want to be concise, and we want to be good about it. We want to know what's a success and what isn't, but at the same time, we don't want to make it so debilitating that they can't get it done.
Yeah, I feel like that is pretty similar to what Jim was saying about that. So I can definitely, I think the point I'm taking from that is sort of as we're making an effort to get more information or ask for more pointed information, that we are kind of doing a parallel effort to make sure that the application overall isn't like ballooning or becoming extremely burdensome just to fill it out. So maybe if we're going to focus a little more on equity and focus a little more on performance, that at the same time I'm kind of making an effort to pare back, maybe not overall the information that we need, but just making sure that we still have a relatively concise application, and then we're not asking applicants to put in, you know,
Right.
a really unreasonable amount of effort in order to fill
I
this
think
out.
concise is, you brought that up. I think concise is a really good word, and it's really appropriate. And even larger cities now are taking a second look at federal funds because of the requirements that come with them. And so I know in our small city right now we're talking about getting rid of a state highway and making it a local highway because of the requirements that the state has to have any projects going on that involve that state highway. So we have to look at it very carefully so that we don't eliminate the people that really need it the most.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and that does tie kind of directly back to what Councilor Young was saying about sort of the equity and who's even able to apply for these funds, because definitely the more complicated we make our application process, the fewer people are really able to participate in it. So definitely point taken on that one, and as I'm working through this, will definitely try to not let it become a beast, especially as I know lots of these organizations have a lot of other stuff that they're applying for too. And we don't want to be a big burden. Okay, well, I think that we've kind of worked through what I wanted to talk about with past performance and equity. The next point that I wanted, this one's just really pretty brief, that I wanted to mention was when we're talking about specific community needs. Our RFA kind of it does already ask about like the needs that your project addresses. But I think, the point that's made about, kind of the needs of Clark County in general, and like, can we kind of dig in and be a little bit more specific? I think that's a pretty easy place for me to go into the application and give an opportunity for, the cities to talk a little bit more about their specific needs and how, their project fits into their overall planning and what they're doing with the city and what their individual communities or even like block level communities are really needing, and how the projects they're proposing works with that. So I think that's something I'm going to take back and do. So then I think I just want to ask, beyond that, the RFAs are very long, so I'm not gonna make you all talk about every single question in the RFA, but I do just kind of want to get a general sense of if you have other kind of generalized feedback, thoughts looking back at the last year, things that you want me to think about and focus on as I'm getting ready to release this one, if there's anything else you want to add.
I got something real quick, a couple things. One is, what is the timing on this? So I know that you'd mentioned like the equity question, how many points. Do we have sufficient time to kind of go over that? When does that need to be decided by? Is that prior to our next meeting? So how are we going to go about that? Because I really would like to see all of the questions, all of the points, and I think I would love to have a board discussion about it if it were possible. That was the first question, and I'll stack them here. The second one is it possible to have a score for which there is no question? So just kind of, us, each one of us individually on this board, how do we feel like the application as a whole fits with the needs of our community and fits with the goals that we have? I don't know if that's possible or not. Because one of the things that has bothered me with each time that I've scored applications is you get caught scoring based on the answers of the questions and how well they were answered, not really any good, not really any way to, put emphasis on the meat of the application.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I guess, certainly the hope with the applications overall is that sort of between all of the different questions that they ask, they would capture sort of the overall, that it would capture overall like what we're going for here, and that you would, after everybody goes through all the different sections, that you would end up with kind of a score at the end that does provide like a good comparison of like the overall value of the project to Clark County. But I also see your point. I also don't want it to be something that would end up too subjective.
Hey, Emily,
Because we do, yeah,
I can answer part of this. So
go for it.
with public solicitations, some of the requirement or part of the requirement, and the SAO looks at this in when they audit us for public solicitations, is are we delineating for the proposers how the RFA is going to be scored and what the scores are based on. So just to try to answer the question directly is, can we have a score without a question unless we are putting very explicitly what that score would be based on? I don't think so, because it would really just be an opportunity for I think, you know, from a public solicitation contracting point, it would just be giving room for very personal bias that the HUD and the federal government in general is trying to avoid and steer people away from. But you know, I do think that's kind of the purpose of questions like, tell me about how this addresses community need. You know, the scores on how you score questions like that, I think kind of gets into subjectively for the person evaluating the proposal and scoring it is, you know, how does this proposal meet that? You know, does it meet the intent of these funds? Does it meet the intent of how we as local government hope to use these funds for the benefit of our community? And that's how I would kind of address that. And then I just very quickly, between now and October, I don't know that there'll be another opportunity for us, at least under a regular schedule, to have a full UCPB meeting. I think Emily would be able to pass the draft RFA to the UCPB for review via email and get feedback for of those questions via email. I just don't know that we have the capacity and the time to have a full meeting like this.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say about about having another meeting. Since we are releasing it on October 2nd, that is before the next time that the UCPB will meet again. So I think kind of my goal here was to go over like the big ones that I knew that we wanted to talk about. But then of course, yeah, I'm taking your feedback back and making changes to these. I can send out a draft to the board to take a look at of the applications before they go out, and I'd be willing to kind of incorporate some additional feedback after that. But yeah, I don't think that we're going to be able to have a forum for like back and forth discussion.
Okay, that would definitely be appreciated.
Okay. Okay, I will plan to do that. Okay, that's the last thing I was going to say about the RFA. So any other thoughts on RFA, action plans, consolidated plan, any of the big stuff before we kind of go on to regular UCPB business? Okay, then next up, we have just a quick overview of the April to June 2023 quarterly reports. So these are, some of these are a little behind from where the projects are at now, because these are drawn from the last reports that we've gotten, which was through June 30th, and we are going to be getting new quarterly reports about a month from now. But we will just go ahead and share with you kind of where all of our projects were at in June, and then we might be able to give a little bit of kind of subjective or additional information here if that's, so here we go. Rebecca, take it away.
Well, we are very limited on time, so I'm going to talk quickly, and I'm only going to highlight a few of these, but you will get these slides. They'll be posted, and we'll make sure that you have access to the report so that you can do a little deeper dive on your own. A couple of the projects that we really wanted to call out to make sure that you were aware of what's going on. The Battleground Southeast Clark Avenue Improvements project, that environmental has to be aggregated with the new VHA housing project, which is in pre-development. So the project is going to take a little bit longer before it can be able to go get underway, but we are aware of what's happening and why that project is on hold for right now. The Camas Northwest 14th improvement project is now officially under construction as of last week, and so that one is moving forward. The Ridgefield G Creek Loop Improvements project has been on hold for a while, as there's been some different types of projects that might affect the stormwater improvement project that was applied for. So we are working with staff to get that project moving forward, and hopefully we'll have that going quickly. And then another major development is with the New Heights clinic, the primary clinic construction. The provider indicated that plans have changed and the project timeline is pushed back. So we are in works with that agency and are looking at reallocating those plans in our 2024 RFA because of the delay in that project, and have them come back in for funding at a future date when that project is a little bit more ready to go forward. All of the other programs and projects seem to be running pretty much on schedule, as they've been awarded funding, and projects begin in January for our programs like our tenant-based rental assistance and our economic development programs. And again, we'll send these out to you so that you can take a deeper look into them. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact Emily or myself, and we can take a deeper dive into and answer any of your questions. And I will send it back to you, Emily, for review of program updates.
Oh, we've got a couple more slides of the quarterly reports.
Correct. All of them. So we'll provide this because we only have 2 minutes left in our time frame today. I wanted
Got
to
it. Okay, skipping ahead. The only program update I've got is that we are requalifying as an urban county right now. That has to happen every 3 years. Everything is done for that. All of the cities have agreed to continue on in this consortium for another 3 years. We have an amendment to this agreement that we need to submit to HUD that has been sent out to all of the mayors, and I think all of the members of this board were also copied on a draft of that amendment. So please let me know truly as soon as possible if there are any issues, anything that would be holding up your mayor or city manager from signing that. It's an extremely simple amendment. All it is adding some additional code references to the fair housing and civil rights requirements, and those things are already agreed to in the original agreement. So it's really just adding some additional language that HUD is looking for. So let me know if you have any issues with that. Otherwise, I look forward to those coming back signed, and I will be submitting those as a packet to HUD on September 26th. So please make sure you get them to me, hopefully a couple days before that. And then now we can take public comment if there is any. Otherwise, we are done for the day.
Sounds like there's no public comment. Does anybody on the board have anything that they'd like to say before we adjourn? Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Young. Thank you.